Hi and welcome. I'm Annette Oltmans, founder and CEO of the Men Project. In this workshop about navigating the maze of confusion, I will set the stage with essential concepts and terms that make conversations with an abusive person confusing and complex. Next, I'll share the maze of confusion with you, which is a metaphor for a conversation, where together we can see how all of these terms come into play for a powerful visual of just how difficult conversations with an abuser can be. We're going to explore the impact these terms and the maze have on the one experiencing harm. And finally, I'll share how to get out of the maze of confusion, share what a healthy conversation looks and feels like, and you will walk away equipped with tools to untangle the confusion and reduce the stress that confusion causes. I invite you to join us for this clarifying discussion on the maze of confusion so you can become empowered and equipped to navigate through it. Well, hi everyone and welcome. I'm Annette Oltmans. I'm founder and CEO of the Men Project, and I'm truly so grateful that you're here with us today for this workshop titled Navigating the Maze of Confusion. Through this time, you'll more clearly see and understand why conversations are so confusing and difficult with an abusive person, and you'll learn how to untangle the confusion and exit the maze of confusion. Or if you're helping someone in this situation, you'll gain clear insight as you walk along the person in your care. Have you ever been in a conversation where you felt that something just isn't right, but you can't quite put your finger on it? You feel like the conversation is going in circles, unraveling what's really happening while experiencing relational stress and confusion can be really challenging and it's exhausting. Sometimes a victim doesn't realize the source of their relational conflict is actually intimate partner violence. It's a form of emotional abuse. It actually is domestic violence. And so without knowing this, they can languish in these types of relationships for years in total confusion. Often victims of covert emotional abuse think something is wrong with themselves rather than something is wrong with their partner. So I have a question for you to get the conversation going. Have you ever been in a conversation where you feel that something isn't right, but you can't quite describe it? Or have you ever felt so confused in a conversation and can't figure out why it's so difficult to get to a resolution? Maybe you can't even remember what started the argument in the first place. You may feel that the conversation is going in circles, but not accomplishing anything meaningful.
Somebody said every day in my marriage. Another one said, yes, absolutely, 100%. Another 100%. Another all caps, yes, with an exclamation point.
Yeah.
20 years worth, a lot of 100%. Someone saying often. If someone said, why just this AM and for the past 32 years? Another one said 40 years and put stupid. Another person said, of course, more times than I can count. And they are just lots of people relating to this today. And
first off, I just want to say I am so sorry that you're going through this. It is so hard. I know firsthand what that feels like. It's so very stressful and taxing on your overall mental and physical health. You can't fix it. You try everything. You try being soft. You try being firm. You try disengaging. You try everything, and you can't control what this other person is doing. You are an empathic, kind person that's just seeking, I don't mean to say just, you are seeking healthy emotional connection where you two bring your issues together and you have a meaningful way to resolve that. But you're dealing with somebody who has an entirely different mindset, a defensive posturing that makes it impossible to travel through a conversation in a healthy way. And I know how stressful that is. So, Jill, is there any other comments that you'd like to read off?
A couple more did come in. One said, my husband often created confusion when I tried to discuss something with him.
Yeah.
And another one typed, I thought I was committing to a lifelong relationship based on love, but ended up being an expert in emotional abuse.
Yeah. That's shows why we get so exhausted. We work so hard to find solutions. We are invested in our relationship. We will try anything under the sun to make it better. And the mindset of an abuser is too defensive, to be open, to allow a place for your voice to be heard. And it just sabotages the relationship. And all the work it takes for you to understand emotional abuse is also exhausting because it's after years of confusion and stress. So I can relate to that. And I want to really caution you to take real good care of yourself, because that exhaustion is really caused by high levels of stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, et cetera, that really tax your endocrine system. So that's just something that I really want you to think about. I want you to take a look at what Jill is putting up on the screen, because what we have available is what we call our terms and definitions. And there's so many more terms that you could probably contribute to this list, but it's basically all those tricky, slippery, manipulative behaviors that the abuser will use to block you in a conversation. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Glance through this, and hopefully you'll find this validating. You can see by everybody's comments in the chat that you are not alone. This is an epidemic. It's a pervasive problem. So it's so easy to become confused and exhausted when constantly confronted with behaviors that we're laying out in these terms and definition sheet. Clarifying the abuse, really being able to label it and to have proper language to describe it, alleviates the state of stressful confusion. And it validates you for the first time, unless somebody else has done that for you. But oftentimes we need to see it in writing. We need to see that it is legitimized in writing with the proper language in order to fully take in that validation. So providing clear language enables you to identify and call out these behaviors specifically, or advocate for yourself, whether that be with your therapist or a family member or a close friend. So I want to address a couple of these terms, or a few. Minimization, that's one, where your perspective is belittled with the intention to make what you value unimportant. And ultimately, it destroys your confidence. It destroys your creativity, your support in being open and creative. And it destroys your sense of autonomy and individuality, because you have to adopt the mindset of the other person according to the abuser. He or she doesn't give you room to be yourself. Another term is blame shifting, where the abuser not only refuses to take responsibility, but also assigns the liability onto the victim, saying things like, I wouldn't have got angry if you'd just done what I said when I asked you, or I never said that. You're twisting things around, even though it's the one twisting things around, or joking sarcastically, maybe about a body part or some behavior that you have, or some part of your personality, and then blaming the victim for being too sensitive when the victim objects. Another term is deflection. So you raise this reasonable complaint, concern, or hurt, and rather than addressing the topic, the abuser refuses to discuss the problem in a healthy way that will allow you to move to a solution. They change the topic or switch it around on the victim so the victim can hardly remember what started the discussion that escalated into an argument in the first place. So that's deflection. Another term I want to address is withholding. Abusers will withhold affection, or they'll control when affection can actually take place. They may also withhold conversation altogether by sometimes for weeks at a time by adopting the silent treatment as a form of punishment. Using the silent treatment is abusive. It's okay to say, look, we're both triggered. I want to take 30 minutes or an hour to collect my thoughts, and then we'll come back and revisit this. But to punish someone with the silent treatment is not okay. That's abusive. The next term I want to talk about is false accusations. We all know if we've been falsely accused of something, how much anxiety and distress it causes. It really does. So for the victim, being accused of things they did not do, it undermines you. It puts you on the defense and it derails the conversation. This tactic, false accusation, is often used in couple therapy in order to hijack what the point that the victim really wants to discuss, and in turn flip it around so the victim is on the hot seat explaining why that false accusation isn't credible. And usually there's a shred of truth or a thread of truth in the false accusation, so it's even more complicated to explain that the totality of the accusation isn't true. It's confusing to the therapist or to others, and it basically derails the session because to go through all of that takes a lot of time. Or the victim is met with an abuser who avoids responsibility at all costs, an abuser who is chronically defensive. The maze of confusion is essentially stonewalling. Stonewalling means blocking your ability to communicate authentically with multiple diversions. So if you're trying to be authentic and have a meaningful connection with your partner to discuss something important, stonewalling is when they'll use multiple behaviors to block you. You are so stopped and everything gets so twisted around and confusing that nothing gets accomplished and you're just spinning in circles trying to figure out what all is happening and how to address those behaviors. They'll shut you down before you can truly fully discuss the topic. In stonewalling, the abuser shuts down your voice, blocks all of your attempts to address either the behaviors or to resolve the conflict in a solutions-oriented way. The abuser controls what can and cannot be discussed or resolved. They have an entirely different agenda. They are operating from an entirely different playbook. They say and do just about anything to avoid even taking responsibility for the smallest things, for their wrongdoing, or they'll refuse to be held accountable for their actions or promises they made or any number of things. People who are emotionally abusive are uncomfortable with feelings and emotions. They are emotionally immature. The lack of emotional intelligence means they react defensively rather than respond in a calm way. So they are uncomfortable with their own emotions just as much as they are uncomfortable with your emotions because of their lack of emotional IQ, their lack of familiarity with what emotions mean and what emotions are appropriate for a given circumstance. That's one reason why you'll notice you receive little or no empathy. Through all of these manipulative tactics, victims rarely receive a sincere apology for the abuse, which is something that could bring healing. They're more likely to be given a partial apology or an apology without change, or they'll make an apology and then a few sentences later, they take the apology back by saying, but you, and so it's not an authentic apology. Abusers are more interested in powering over the victim and winning arguments than they are in emotional connection or listening authentically. And it's common for a covert abuser to shift from one tactic to another swiftly in one conversation. And when the abusive behaviors are constantly changing, like I said before, it's nearly impossible for you to identify the patterns of what are happening, how to name these behaviors, because you barely land on one and then they're doing something else. So the more these behaviors are combined or repeated, the more confusing, the more traumatizing and toxic the relationship becomes. The lack of clarity and being continually blamed for all the wrongs in the issue, in the conversation, or in the relationship in general significantly wears the victim down and can cause the victim become anxious, depressed, hopeless, fearful, on edge, and all of these lead to such a low sense of self-esteem. It can also lead to physical ailments because prolonged stress impacts your endocrine system and impacts your ability to have an immune response. So you may end up with autoimmune illnesses, an overall compromised immune system, and it causes changes to happen in the brain from trauma. Confusion increases the symptoms of trauma. You might want to think of the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn response. So the fight response is when you are now triggered by how unjust and how you're being placed in the hot seat. And so your reaction is to fight back for yourself. In other situations, you might feel so overwhelmed that you want to flee the conversation and leave the room. Sometimes they say things that stump you and you freeze and you don't know what to say. And other times you might fawn, which means you appease and accommodate and you just do anything and say anything to stop the arguing, even though it means that you deny yourself of what the truth actually is. These are all methods to protect yourself that come out of being really triggered or traumatized. We dive deeper into this, into trauma and all the symptoms and the manifestations in our self-paced course for victims and survivors of abuse. Our course is also good for anyone questioning whether they are what they are experiencing in the relationship, if it's abuse or if it's something else. And our course takes place in 4 modules that are 2 to 3 hours long. We believe our course will save you approximately a year of therapy, or if you're in therapy, we get so many emails that say, I got more out of this course than I got in 2 years or 1 year, 2 years in therapy. So it'll jumpstart you on your healing process. So where in others, without taking the course, you spend a lot of time in therapy ruminating over specific arguments. You are reliving them. You're trying to sort them out. You're journaling what happened because you are trying to overcome how you were gaslit and told that they never said that, or that you said something you didn't say. And so this course really helps you to overcome the need to process all of that. It clarifies your thinking and jumpstarts your healing process. Okay, so let's take a look at the maze of confusion. Victims of these types of behaviors work much harder at maintaining the relationship in an effort to have a fulfilling and authentic conversation. And so if you look at the maze, you're seeing all these dead ends. Every maze has basically one entrance and only one pathway through to the exit, but so many dead ends. And so this is a metaphor of what a conversation looks like with an abusive partner. Every time you raise a point or you try to overcome an objection, you're met with these dead ends. They're constant. They're aggressive. They're meant to stop and block you rather than what a healthy conversation would look like. So your attempts to be understood can even backfire. And you're now on the defensive, trying to explain yourself even more, even though you already explained your point very well in the first place. So if you look at the maze, the gold line is what a healthy conversation should look like. And I'm going to get into that in just a second. But it's very difficult, if not impossible, to find a resolution in a conversation where covert emotionally abusive behaviors are present. Every attempt to have an authentic resolution or conversation or discussion on the victim's part becomes lost in this maze. And in a maze, like I said, it's more dead ends than it is a pathway to solution. So a healthy conversation, let's discuss what that would look like. It's clarifying the issue at hand. So both people are calm, and one person is usually clarifying the issue that they want to discuss. But both parties need to have a desire for mutual listening and understanding, not trying to talk over each other, but really having a sense of curiosity to want to understand more. It requires a sense of calm, not being triggered and not wanting to argue. It's really trying to understand one another. There's mutual respect. There's mutual validation. And finally, you can move through to solutions. The dead ends represent each covert behavior that the abuser uses to block or divert the conversation. So if you consider blame shifting, minimization, defensiveness, deflections, false accusation, you can see how these behaviors will not only hijack reasonable attempts to resolve the conflict or emotionally connect, but it also is so unnerving and where you feel like your feet lost the ground that they're standing on. There are many more behaviors that covert abusers employ, such as catastrophizing, which means blowing things out of proportion, or scapegoating you, which means blaming you or others rather than accepting responsibility for their own wrongdoing, or cover-ups, which equates to confusing you by giving you a gift or doing some nice act of service to distract you from the real problem and in fact make you feel then obligated to this person. It's a way to manipulate you or others to think that your abuser is actually really sincerely trying, or others might think, well, this person who's volunteering in the community is a really good person, so I can't imagine that they would be difficult in their marriage or let alone abusive. So it's a very cunning way to distract you, and it confuses you when what you really need to land on is, for example, if they were sincere about apologizing or sincere about resolving, they would stay specific to the issues that you brought up. They would follow through with those specific requests over an extended period of time, not just for a day or two or 3 weeks or 3 months. It would have staying power, and they would not be trying to confuse you by doing other things for you that they like to do, but ignoring the main point of what you brought up in the first place. Another thing would be, example of behaviors would be broken promises, where they promise that they'll take care of something or promise you that they'll change, only later to say they forgot or tell you they never promised you that in the first place. Or they'll say, well, I bought you that gift. That should show you that I care about you, but they're ignoring the main issue. So you have this anxiety because you feel obligated, and you can see how that is a form of manipulation. Communication with someone who is employing emotionally abusive tactics is mentally, emotionally, and physically exhausting. And considering all of this, it's noteworthy how the ability to discern what is amiss in the relationship is hidden from the victim by an array of manipulations used by the abuser for the purpose of avoiding exposure and responsibility. They are not humble. They consider humility humiliation. It's a big difference. This type of abuse usually begins slowly and increases over time. The person subjected to these behaviors is groomed to doubt their own value. So you're doubting your own value. You're losing confidence in your ability to perceive situations accurately. You actually may wonder, am I not communicating effectively? Is there something intrinsically wrong with me? Because why is my partner treating me this way? Or am I just an unlovable person? And you start to take on all this responsibility as all this self-doubt and your self-esteem or your love for yourself is diminished and lost. So I want to say something, and it's important to understand. Most of us, if not all of us, have used some of these behaviors at one point or another. Consider blame shifting, where somebody raises a concern. Well, you might have a concern you wanted to raise, so you flip it around immediately rather than hearing them out and listening to what they're saying. But when an abuser with a faulty worldview, a faulty belief system, and a sense of entitlement uses these tactics regularly, they are attempting to gain power and control while diminishing, suppressing, and weakening the victim's voice. The victim, on the other hand, well, let me say it differently. A more healthy person might blurt out a blame-shifting remark, but if it's pointed out to them, they're going as being abusive or being really disruptive to a conversation, they're going to stop. They're from a wellspring inside themselves, they're going to say, oh yeah, I can see how that disrupted the conversation. I'll wait until you say what you have to say. I'll listen and respond. And then I would like a turn to raise my point. So it's a healthy person will stand to be corrected and they will correct themselves. They want to grow, they want to learn, but that's not what's happening with an abusive person. And this can be more easily understood by looking at our resource called the Pillars of Abuse, which you can find on our website under resources. We go through this Pillars of Abuse tool thoroughly, discussing the mindset of those who cause harm in our self-paced course that I was talking about earlier. But in brief, just to give you an idea of what it is, we unpack the 5 pillars of entitlement, a faulty belief system, image management, and finally, their manipulative attempt to receive preferential treatment from others. Those are the pillars of abuse that create an abusive mindset. So to be clear, in a loving, caring relationship, when a person is emotionally mature and has empathy, and they realize they have hurt their partner, they have the desire and they have the capacity to adopt immediate change. They will genuinely demonstrate compassion and empathy with their words and actions. They'll apologize. They'll work to repair the harm done. They'll take responsibility. They'll step into that responsibility, and they will stop the behavior. In a loving and caring relationship, healthy conversations that lead to solutions foster emotional intimacy, safety, and a deeper connection. So when there's a conflict in a healthy relationship, it's actually an opportunity to grow closer if both people are communicating in a healthy way. So it's something that healthy relationships almost look forward to work out their differences, to get to know each other better and to be closer. So referring back to the maze, a healthy conversation moves along the gold line where clarity is woven in with a desire for mutual understanding, mutual respect, and mutual validation. A healthier listener will demonstrate this true sense of curiosity to understand what the other is saying what they mean by what they're saying, and what they're feeling. Then they will respond in a manner that shows that they care about those things. And these responses create a safe environment for communication, and it builds trust for future communication, allowing each person to process their differing perspectives in an open and calm way. A quick note, there's nothing wrong with stating a complaint. So many therapists and faith leaders will shame you for complaining, like as if complaining is something forbidden in religious circles. But a conflict should be seen as an opportunity. So hold on to that. Like I said, it is a way to reach a deeper sense of understanding one another. The clarity that you've gained by being able to name and describe what is happening in your relationship, what we've been talking about, the clarity will provide you with the words to communicate your experience and will help you identify when the destructive behaviors are happening. You might choose to call them out, or you may choose to walk away from a conversation where they're being employed, but you will have the tools to describe your situation. And maybe you only describe it to a therapist or to a friend or a family member. But now, if you've ever tried to explain, which you may have, I remember trying to do this, trying to explain covert, emotionally abusive, or these manipulative, confusing behaviors. You sound like you're complaining or oversensitive, because sometimes the things that the abuser does are subtle. It's hard to really legitimize how this is a pattern that has been playing out over and over, and to convey how that really impacts your relationship, how it impacts your mental health, and how it impacts your physical well-being. So when we have the terminology, it not only helps you identify, but it helps you decide how you're going to respond. So if you're in a conversation with your partner or as a responder walking alongside an abuser, and you come to the conclusion that it's not safe for you emotionally, you are allowed to stop engaging. When communicating with an abuser who's using these behaviors, these crazy-making circular behaviors, becoming entangled in the maze is not going to go well. It's not doing any good for you. And trying harder to make them understand what you meant or what you're feeling is only going to lead to more rejection. It's often best to recognize what's really happening and disengage from the conversation while making a mental note or journaling to document what really happened. So you are clear, but don't expect the other person to understand. Equip yourself to untangle the confusion. Confusion causes a high level of stress running through your body. Clarity will immediately help to mitigate that stress. And then the more you understand the terms and definitions, the more familiar you become with them, and the more you're able to look at them and maybe look at past journal entries or think about conversations that you've had repeatedly, you're able to then recognize when they come at you in a new conversation. You won't be so blindsided, and being blindsided immediately causes trauma. So the more familiar you are, the more you'll be able to see it for what it is and not take it on, not engage in it. Don't step into the maze. Concise definitions for gaining a thorough and clear understanding, followed by practical protocols for action, become the vehicle for lasting change. And understanding what's actually happening resolves cognitive dissonance that you may have been carrying. And if you're not familiar with the term cognitive dissonance is when your values or belief about a situation are contradicted, but you have a hard time seeing what's actually going on. So let's say something specifically is going on, whatever is going on in the conversation, all these crazy making behaviors, you're not seeing them for what they are. you're internalizing them as something's wrong with you or that you need to try harder. You're not recognizing what's really happening. And when they gaslight you, you question yourself rather than clearly recognize they're gaslighting you. You cannot change another person, but you can change your perspective, your belief, your point of view, and you can change how you react or respond, which changes the dance and preserves your sanity. I'm not saying that in any way you are responsible or that you even have the power to change the other person. You can look at things more clearly and accurately and find new ways to change how you engage with this person. Maybe it's just for a time so that you can plan an exit strategy. Or maybe for you, you made the decision that you don't ever want to leave the situation for whatever your personal reasons, but you're going to completely disengage emotionally and not expect any emotional support from this other person and basically live parallel lives rather than interfacing lives in your household. These are personal choices, but both outcomes require you to really understand how you can reprogram your thinking and change how you respond so that you're not sucked into the maze. For example, you may have magical thinking, which is believing things are better than they actually are. Your thinking is distorted, or when you believe an apology without tangible actions is actually going to repair the damage done. It's actually going to lead magically to a meaningful change. That's magical thinking because that's not going to happen. You can also think of it this way. It's when you gaslight yourself. I say that gently with grace for yourself because we've all been there. Don't be hard on yourself for cognitive dissonance. No matter how intelligent you are, coercive forms of manipulation are going to be confusing for anyone. And an empathic, kind person is going to immediately look at themselves first and say, what's my part in this? And so it's so easy to have cognitive dissonance, to have a distorted viewpoint, because you haven't yet grasped that the other person is operating from an entirely different book than you are in terms of how relationships should function, an entirely different worldview. So the Men Terms and Definitions handout is a great tool. Let's say you're going to go and see a therapist. You can print it out because it's downloadable for free on our website in PDF fashion. You can circle the terms and definitions that you recognize in a certain argument, and you can show that to them. If they don't fully recognize what you're talking about, and they push back, it's time to leave that therapist, because not every therapist has training in emotional abuse. You would think they would. Marriage and family therapy should be about marriage and family. They should understand emotional abuse, but many never receive training on this topic. And so it's not safe for you to be there. And it's okay to leave a therapist and say, you're not understanding something. I need to go see somebody who really has taken extra continuing education unit classes on this topic of narcissism, emotional abuse, and so forth. So basically, identifying abuse will minimize the traumatic effects, leading to better outcomes, whatever that is that you choose. Without clarity, you're more likely to blame yourself for not communicating accurately, or for the other person to understand, or in some way you may believe it was your fault, or, like I said, you're not lovable, or in any way placing any amount of responsibility. No problems can be resolved in an abusive relationship until abuse is thoroughly confronted and resolved over a long-standing period of time. There's no point in discussing anything else So any therapist who tries to say, well, if you could word your sentences differently, then maybe they wouldn't react. No, none of that is your responsibility. That is just a waste of time. Abuse needs to be confronted. It is their choice. Abuse is a choice. It's never the victim's fault. And all of that other stuff where they attempt to have you change yourself, other than you deciding within yourself, you want to disengage, you want to become more knowledgeable, or you want to leave. Those are your choices. And that is a perfectly healthy thing to work on in therapy, how you're going to implement your plan, but not something they impose on you to change, to like you're responsible in some way for how your abuser is reacting. Reactions are each of our choices. And other people aren't responsible for how another person reacts. So join our self-paced course. This course will propel you on your healing journey. I promise you, we vetted it, we beta tested it, we tried multiple ways to teach these complicated topics to simplify them so you would really grasp them. We tested them with educators, with survivors and victims and therapists and medical professionals, domestic violence agencies. It is a wonderful course that will jumpstart you on your healing journey and help you resolve any cognitive dissonance that you may be experiencing. So have grace for yourself, interrupt your thoughts, and practice self-love and self-compassion. Think differently about yourself, pour love into yourself, and take really good care of yourself using self-care tactics to help mitigate your trauma, to help produce endorphins, to lift you up rather than the toxic hormones that bring you down. So I'm going to wrap up now so I can address any questions that you may have or any comments. Please know that we're always here for you. If you have any questions after today or you need any resources or words of wisdom, please feel free to reach out to me at Annette@themendproject.com. Okay.
We do have a number of questions, Annette. I want to read one comment to you first.
Okay.
It says, when I listen to Annette speak, it uncovers my experience to me. It is more helpful and reassuring than any other training on this. The experience of living in this is terrible. I am in the process of divorcing somewhere I never thought I'd really be. But even in the vast uncertainty, there is at least hope. Annette, you have delivered that.
Oh, thank you so much. Hearing feedback for how education that we provide helps you with your own perspective or helps you make decisions that are healthy for you is why we do the work that we do. So it really blesses me to hear that. Thank you for that. I'm so glad that you find this helpful.
Yes. And just so you know, as I'm reading that and as you're speaking, we're having a number of people saying, thank you. It's such a powerful session. Thank you so much. It's so helpful. I appreciate so much all of your insight. I needed this class so badly.
I'm so glad.
There's a lot of positive feedback, Annette, that I want to make sure you hear.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, and one of the comments says you provided this information in such a powerful and kind way. And Annette, really, you do have a gift at delivering really solid, clear information with so much compassion. So I love that everybody here is receiving.
Thank you, everyone. I'm just so glad from the bottom of my heart that it's helpful for you. I wish I had had this when I was going through it myself. It was so stressful. So I do have tremendous compassion for what you're going through. It is so hard. And so I'm glad that this is helping you in if it just in a little way, I'm so glad it's helpful.
And there was a comment actually about what you just said, that having that firsthand experience, there's nobody who understands it more than someone who's experienced it.
That's so true.
Yes. So
it's so nuanced and layered that you really have to have walked through it in order to truly understand it. That's why survivors make such great advocates. You know, once you've healed, you don't want to do that too soon. You want to take really good care of yourself. But if you ever want to consider advocacy, survivors make the best advocates.
Okay,
Okay, questions.
questions. Okay. I tell my husband each time he raises his voice at me that I want a mediator. I don't feel safe talking to him. He says no, that talking to people doesn't work. So we never resolve or talk because he's always on fight mode. Do you want to speak to that, Annette?
Well, there again, first off, I'm sorry you're going through that. It's so triggering to have somebody escalate their posture, and men are intimidating. They have usually bigger bodies, they're stronger and more forceful, their voices are deeper, and so it's very intimidating. You can't get anything resolved when somebody is in that mode. It's impossible. I'm just concerned for your well-being. Somebody who's raging it's so destructive. That's actually a form of overt emotional abuse, where it's like raging, loud put downs, or physical abuse, or damaging property, like punching a hole in the wall and that sort of thing. So it has another really negative impact on you because it's startling. It causes fear and it's unpredictable. You don't know what they're capable of doing. My advice is that you really start considering what you want for yourself long term, because if your spouse is not willing to be fully invested in anger management or batterers intervention courses, which are available in all states, oftentimes they're listed through your local government, your local courthouse. If they're not willing to do that, there's really no hope for them to change. This is stuff they have to deeply work at. I would, in the meantime, whatever you decide to do, I would try to really disengage and try to just take care of yourself and not focus on any interaction that you have with your partner. I would stay clear of him as much as you can and focus on getting stronger, learning as much as you can, so that you have a more accurate perspective of how destructive this truly is for you. And especially if you have children, children in the developmental stages of life are deeply affected by this kind of tension and abuse in the house. Their brains are developing, and yet they're in a traumatized state, which actually will overdevelop their amygdala, which is the accelerator in the car, if you want to think of it that way, and it will underdevelop their hippocampus, which is the regulator or the brake in the car, and that will stay with them for their entire life. So it's so important I don't want to tell you what to do, but I just want you to really consider exiting this situation because of how harmful it is.
I want to keep moving along because we have several questions
Okay.
here. Earlier as you were speaking, somebody mentioned the need to detach physically and not wanting to hug or kiss her husband, and asked the question, is that abusive? And I very briefly mentioned that placing a boundary when we are being treated poorly is absolutely okay. And I want you to speak to that so everyone here can listen to your response to that.
Yeah, I think when I talk about the silent treatment or withholding affection under the term withholding, a lot of times victims will say, well, am I being abusive that I'm withholding intimacy? No, that's very different. You're not trying to power over and control this other person. You're setting a boundary for your emotional and physical safety. They are trying to power over and control you. It's a very different motive. For you, it's self-preservation. For them, it's punishment. So it's very different. Don't take that on as being abusive. You have every right to not engage in intimacy when you don't feel emotionally safe. That is it's a great boundary, and it might be a motivating factor for your spouse to get into therapy. And don't let any therapist, though, pressure you to be intimate if you don't feel safe. You are not obligated to give to give your body and be in such a vulnerable position in this sacred space when you are being abused. So take yourself off the hook for that.
There was a few more questions. I'm going to read this one. Is it wise to temporarily separate with 3 small children when you're broke? My husband is emotionally abusive and is taking a toll on me and my oldest. It breaks my heart knowing my daughter hears him and it affects her. I don't know how to not allow this hurtful words affect me. I always leave the room when he speaks nonsense, but he follows me and tells me I need to keep the door open so I'm not alone. I don't know what to do.
Yeah, I think that you are on the right track, that you have small children. They are so vulnerable in this time when their brain is developing. It has an extremely negative impact to be around abuse at a young age. Oftentimes they'll grow up to be victims because it's what has been modeled for them. They grow up with such a low sense of self-esteem, a low sense of worth, and their brain is altered permanently. So it's critically important that you remove your kids from that kind of behavior. And with co-parenting and visitation, they're going to have to see their dad some of the time, but the older they get, you can start coaching them. We have a great resource for how to coach and advocate for your kids. It's called Coercive Control Consulting, and they have a website and they have webinars and all kinds of tools that I recommend that you take a look at. But even if things will work out, even if money is scarce, it is better to have your children with 2 nickels to rub together in a small apartment where it's calm and peaceful. It's always better. So I totally encourage you to follow through on what your gut is telling you to do. I hope that helps.
Thank you,
I'm
Annette.
not pressuring you though. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just saying that's what you asked me and you're on the right track.
When I was still living with my husband, we had daily conversations, and those are in quotes. And no matter which topic was brought up and how kindly I stated my position on his responsibility, he went into a rage. When I said, unless you lower your voice, I'll leave the room, he rarely stopped screaming, so I would leave the room and he would chase me all over the house. One time, he was so insistent on continuing the conversation that I hid in the closet. I'm ashamed to admit that now. I left him 1 year ago, and even though I have peace now, I still experience exhaustion and autoimmune issues.
Yeah, I'm so proud of you for leaving. And you did do the right thing by trying to leave the room. It is very aggressive. So some abusers are that type where they rage and then they follow you and they want to argue every point. They want to win every single thing. And other abusers will punish you by retracting, avoiding you, and giving you the silent treatment, punishing you that way. So they're not all the same, but they're both really harmful. They're both very painful situations to be in. So you're going to feel exhausted for a while. A trauma is very real on your physical body and on your emotional well-being. But I promise you, if you keep working on self-care, and I don't know where you are in this process, but I know for me, I isolated and I was doubly abused by some of my people who I thought were my friends. They didn't believe me and they judged me wrongly. They mischaracterized me to others. And that was so traumatizing that I was really afraid to talk to anybody because I didn't have the language yet to describe it. And I didn't believe that anyone would really understand me. And I was trying to prevent myself from being more traumatized. So I isolated, but that delayed my healing. So I don't know where you are, but what I found and what studies show to be really helpful is if you can stretch yourself and be uncomfortable and put on your tennis shoes and go for a walk out in the fresh air, go into nature, or take an exercise class, participate in some kind of creativity. It could be as simple as embroidery or crocheting or knitting to taking a painting class. But it's so good for you to get outside of yourself, to get outdoors. For me, I joined a sporting activity. I learned a new sporting activity, and I met a whole lot of new friends that I didn't have to talk about all of this with. And it was just so endorphin producing to be around physical exercise and also to have casual social conversations that were uplifting. These kinds of self-care is so critical to you getting through this healing process, because trauma is real. It takes a long time to overcome it, but you can tremendously speed up the process if you are active and if you have a couple of trusted friends that you can, or a good therapist that understands you, that you can connect with. So human connection and activity and creativity are the things that I recommend for you to help you get over that exhaustion. And you may not feel like doing these things, but I promise you they will be helpful. And you might not notice a change at first, but if you stick with it, you might even have social anxiety at first, but if you stick with it, you will start to see how you are changing, how you're calming, and you're really finding joy in your day. So that's what I say about that. I hope I wasn't being presumptuous, because I don't know exactly what you're doing to help yourself heal, but that's what I recommend.
We have a question here. What if it's an adult child that's manipulating and they really believe they're right?
Oh, it's so hard. Kids that are, kids can be narcissists too, and it's really, really tough. I would see if they would be open to you sitting down and talking about how you experience discussions. I don't know if you're saying they're right about an issue, or they believe they're right in these conversations when they're being manipulative, when like they're doing that narcissistic thing where they have to win every point in every argument. If it's this style, usually that comes out of some form of trauma, or that they grew up with an abuser and they adopt the abuser's mindset. They've watched the abuser mistreat you, so they start to adopt that, or they had trauma in their childhood. And trauma can come from any number of things. It can come from maybe you weren't as emotionally available as you would be today. So the child felt shut down and not really safe to be open. It can come from so many things, or it can come from other dramatic events and things. You just might not know exactly what's at the core of that. But I cautiously say, if you can find a really good trauma therapist that understands abuse and narcissism, and if you could meet with that person and explain what's happening and be open about any way you may have contributed to early childhood trauma, or that maybe your spouse did, and also with the agenda that you really want to identify and have the therapist identify and explain what healthy communication works like, and that it's not defensive. And if your child's being defensive, being inquisitive, why they're defensive, what are they protecting themselves against? Is there some deep-seated shame going on, or do they feel like they need validation, like they need to vindicate themselves from something in the past? It's so complex, but if your child would be willing to participate in a healthy type of therapeutic intervention, it could really work. In the meantime, I would try to avoid. So I don't know if this person is being aggressive towards you, or if you try to bring up things and they're just being defensive. I would try to just talk about things that are really like, for example, investing in what their life is and being inquisitive about their friends and about their activities or about their school or about their job. And you just really being there for them and validating them and switching the dynamic into you being the adult and them being the child, even though they're an adult child, and just supporting them and being that person, and you not needing anything from them in return. If they're being aggressive towards you, then that's where I would definitely, you need some kind of intervention or some kind of help to get through that, even if it's just you working alone with a therapist. But if you have more questions about this, you can email me, because I'm not sure exactly your dynamic. And since we're running over so much, I don't want to leave you hanging. So just feel free to email me if you want to provide more clarification. I hope that helps.
Okay, and we have one more just comment. I'm just going to read this last comment. It says, "This was such a validating and clarifying message today, having spent the last 6 years since leaving a 34-year marriage to a man who was professionally diagnosed with NPD."
Oh boy.
Mhm. Researching, reading, attending support groups, and talking with a therapist who is trauma and NPD informed has enabled me to keep moving forward on a healing journey. God has blessed me with the compassion to extend grace to others. I now meet and recognize that they are affected by abuse and ensuing trauma, because I have been there and been able to gain a vocabulary and an understanding of so much that I just did not know when I was in this 34-year marriage. Thank you for being part of my healing journey and the continuing resources you offer. I have had to search for free resources in order to heal, and your podcasts are such a blessing to the community of the abused and traumatized victims who have stayed because they did not know what they did not know. I now facilitate in a program offering resources and community to others coming out of abuse.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for that. And I am so sorry that you were in a relationship so long. Don't beat yourself up over that. It is so common that I speak to people that have been in these abusive relationships for decades, not being able to figure it out. It took me 15 to 20 years to figure out what I was dealing with. It doesn't matter how intelligent you are. We're not given the emotional language or the awareness that people are actually that manipulative, let alone the words to describe it. So I don't want you to beat yourself up. And I'm so proud of you for how far you've come, and that you're helping others, that you're recognizing it and you can show them compassion. I think that's amazing, and that you found resources to help you. And I'm so glad you have a therapist who's helping you. That's amazing too. I would love for you to share with me who your therapist is, because we always try to be able to provide resources. We're just here in California and have our little group, but it's helpful to know other therapists that you've found to be helpful. So continue to take care of yourself. Everyone, take really good care of yourself. Thanks for being here today. And until next time, bye-bye.